Chapter 3.9, How to Communicate Correctly with the Global Mind. So, the connection with the global mind is inevitable. Life is arranged in such a way that all living beings are in a continuous, though uneven, cycle of communication with it. We cannot tear ourselves away from it, even if such a desire arose. Did such a desire ever occur in humanity? One of the first metaphorical evidences for this is undoubtedly in the book of Genesis, chapters 2 and 3. The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. And the Lord God commanded the man, "You are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it, you will certainly die. For God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. She also gave some to her husband, who was with her, and he ate it. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. What is the real meaning of this passage? Global Mind created the man and wishes that he would be a composite, integral part of the common being, the unified biosphere. At the very beginning, people agree with that way themselves. The man was sensitive to the global mind commands, he understood them without words, and obeyed them, realizing that these commands are sent for his own good. At a certain point in history, a man suddenly asked himself, "I am a trembling creature, or whether I have the right?" Quote from Dostoevsky's novel, The Karamazov Brothers. At this fateful hour, a man made an attempt to cut the umbilical cord that connects him to global mind and began to live his own mind. The result is a misery, isn't it? Who is to blame? No one argues that man is the most intelligent being on the planet. Some of us have come to understanding, however, that many people are already communicating with the global mind directly. These people are called geniuses and prophets. Illuminations that carry the light of truth come to them not because of a hard work, but at the most unexpected moments. Few of us realize that in addition to recognized, gifted, and famous personalities, there are many people who are enlightened, to whom the truth is open, and who, nonetheless, keep low profile, live quietly among us, and do not try to teach others. Why do we know so little about these people? There is some mystery here, the answer to which I have not yet found. Let me clarify the essence of the matter. Long ago, among my acquaintances, a circle on the yoga disciples arose. This Eastern teaching was then under the actual prohibition in the former Soviet Union, and the literature was not available. We managed to get some books in English in a clandestine way, translate them to the best of our skills, and print them with a mechanical typewriter. In order to print more copies, we used thin, almost tissue paper, and hit the keys with all of our might. Fingers from this typing hurt. The 7th copy turned out almost unreadable, but enthusiasm prevailed over any difficulties. Some of my yoga friends have made significant progress. They have even learned to read minds, sometimes get insights into what is right and what is not, and so on. But very quickly, it was noticed that as soon as the newborn prophets began to talk about their spiritual achievements openly, their new abilities evaporated. This was a general rule, and when the news reached the ears of all members of our circle, reports of new achievements ceased. The presence of enlightened pupils could be judged only by indirect signs, changes in the style of clothing, food addiction, and special soft and unobtrusive behavior. This is how Plato relates this subject in the Apology of Socrates. This work describes the trial of Socrates on which he was sentenced to death. This is something which began for me in childhood. A sort of voice comes, and whenever it comes, it always turns me away from whatever I am about to do, but never turns me forward. This is what opposes my political activity, and its opposition seems to me altogether noble. For now, well, men of Athens, if I had long ago attempted to be politically active, I would long ago have perished, and I would have benefited neither you nor myself. Now do not be vexed with me when I speak the truth, for there is no human being who will preserve his life if he genuinely opposes either you or any other multitude and prevents many unjust and unlawful things from happening in the city. Rather, if someone who really fights for the just is going to preserve himself even for a short time, it is necessary for him to lead a private rather than a public life. There are people who are closely associated with global mind all their lives, from childhood, but there are those those to whom this ability comes suddenly. The late Metropolitan of Moscow, Makary, who was remarkably bright in his mind, was so morbid and stupid as a child that he could not learn at all. But in the seminary, one of the comrades, during the game, knocked his head with a stone, and after that, Makary's ability turned brilliant, and his health completely recovered. Quote from Cesare Lombroso, The Man of Genius. Sathya Sai Baba, an Indian guru, was stung in the leg by a large black scorpion, as a result of which the boy experienced a state close to a coma. For 2 months, he was tormented by severe pain and periodically fainted. After that, Sathya obtained the ability to heal and predict. It is reported that he began quoting sayings in Sanskrit, which he had not previously known. The Russian, Grigory Rasputin, self-proclaimed holy man and the healer of Nicholas II, son Alexei, who suffered from hemophilia, was beaten with a stake as a horse thief. His neighbor had beaten him with such force that he thought that he had killed him, but Grigory survived. After that, Grigory turned into something strange and illuminated. Historians may regard Rasputin in different ways, but the indisputable fact is his ability to cure young Alexei's hemophilia attacks at a great distance. Rasputin more than once saved the heir's life. He was dragged to the phone, and Rasputin, talking on the phone with Alexei, stopped the bleeding. Is it possible to turn the unconscious, weak communication with global mind into a conscious, permanent, creative way with a mental effort? In other words, can a person bring himself closer to the spiritual global mind power or even merge with it being still alive? There is little doubt about this because geniuses are present in this world. Did you ever try to compose a poem or write a new melody such that people genuinely admire, or invent a new device or solve a tricky theorem? Most of us are not capable of this, but there are people for whom to write poetry, compose music, or invent a device is as natural as to the rest of us to breathe. These people do not spend visible efforts on what an ordinary person simply cannot perform. Where do they get the new ideas not invented by anyone before? You do not know that, do you? Do not be upset. Geniuses also do not have any idea about the source of their inspiration, but even a genius needs special conditions to gain access to global mind. Jesus, in search of inspiration, retired to the desert for 40 days, where he dwelled without food. All the ingenious works, says Voltaire in a letter to Diderot, were created instinctively. Philosophers of the whole world together could not write Armida opera by Rossini, or the fable Animals Seized with the Plague, which La Fontaine dictated, not even being aware what would come of it. Corneille wrote the tragedy of Horace as instinctively as a bird builds a nest. Lamartine often said, "It's not me who thinks, but my thoughts think for me." Mozart admitted that musical ideas are involuntary, like dreams. Hoffman often told his friends, "I work sitting at the piano with my eyes closed and reproduce what someone from the outside tells me." Goethe also said that the poet needs a certain brain irritation, that he himself composed many of his songs as if in a fit of somnambulism. Joseph Haydn attributed the mysterious gifts sent from above, the composing his famous oratorio, The Creation. "When my work was stalled," he said, "I used to go into the chapel with my chaplet in hands. I read the Virgin Prayer, and inspiration came back to me again." Here is how the state of Torquato Tasso, the Italian poet of the 16th century, the Dr. Revel Perret describes. "The pulse is weak and uneven, the skin pale, the head hot, inflamed, eyes shining, bloodshot, running around. At the end of the period of creativity, the author himself often does not understand what he said a minute ago." Obviously, all of them, writes Lombroso in his book The Man of Genius, who writes these examples, instinctively use the means which temporarily increase the flow of blood to the head to the detriment of the rest of the body. The best expression of the necessary condition for a breakthrough is in the words of Isaac Newton. "Genius is patience." He is echoed by George Louis Buffon, "Genius is only great patience," and Ivan Pavlov, "First quality of a mind I have established is extraordinary concentration of the thought, a tendency to keep the problem in mind for days, weeks, months, and years, sometimes all the life." In fact, a genius distinguishes the need for constant concentration on the subject of reflection. I emphasize not the habit of concentration, but coercion to it. In the light of our hypothesis, brilliant people do not produce new ideas on their own. Our brain does not have enough mental power for this. It is designed to process routine information that is subject to logical, i.e., unambiguous analysis. We can recall one of the final scenes of the remarkable movie by Milos Forman's Amadeus. Dying Mozart dictates Antonio Solari the Requiem notes. Solari is delighted. He hardly has time to write down. Every minute he exclaims, "Yes, yes, I understand. It's great." He is also a composer, and not the worst one. He then will edit the score of Wolfgang Amadeus, but he would never, ever be able to compose anything like the 8 bars of Lacrimosa di Sela. Where do these new, ingenious, and simply outstanding poems come from? These arias, pictures, gadgets, finally. The traditional point of view is that they are born in the brain, but the brain should be an extraordinary one, the brain of a genius possessing some unusual properties within itself. If this were so, a talented person would give birth to ideas any time. However, if you challenge really talented people, and I have seen quite a few of them, all unanimously assert that the ideas just come into their heads, like uninvited guests. They fall on by themselves, and sometimes the creator should rush to write them down before forgetting them. Moreover, very often the same ideas are born in people unconnected, separated by thousands of miles and state borders. And these ideas are born almost simultaneously, as if apples ripened on different continents and fell on the heads of scientists sitting under the tree branches. Here are the most striking examples: the independent discovery of the differential and integral calculus by Sir Isaac Newton and Gottfried Leibniz, the Boyle-Mariotte law, the development of the concept of evolution made by Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace, the discovery of oxygen by Carl Scheele, Joseph Priestley, Antoine Lavoisier and colleagues, non-Euclidean geometry, independently developed at the beginning of the 19th century by Nikolai Lobachevsky in Russia, James Bolyai in Hungary, and Gauss in Germany, and others. If in the modern world the so-called multiple discoveries or simultaneous inventions can be explained by the fact that scientists from different countries are fighting for a priority and constantly inform each other about their successes with the help of publications, the above examples do not say anything about this. They came to the heads of some prominent researchers a little earlier than to others, but practically simultaneously and independently. It seems that these ideas were already soaring in the air and were only waiting for the moment and place for the landing. It seems to me that manifestations of genius are not only and not so much in the mental work of the brain of genius, but in its special tuning to the mental processes of the global mind. Only global mind, with the intellectual power that surpasses human brain by millions orders of magnitude, can easily solve problems beyond the ability of 100 billion neurons stored under the cranium. The brain's task is to perceive, remember, and reduce this idea to a form convenient for application. Those geniuses who closely followed the emergence of new ideas managed to notice that everything really new comes to mind in an unclear, indistinct form. The genius himself sometimes gets scared of the idea that came to him. It seems to him wrong. He hesitates in its evaluation and often delays publication, fearing criticism of colleagues. The same Isaac Newton, inventing the law of universal gravitation, did not dare to publish it for 30 years. It seemed to him that the basic position of the law was wrong. For many years, Charles Darwin was tormented by doubts before he decided to publish his theory and did so, fearing for his priority. In these and other cases, it is quite obvious that the invention itself was not born in the brain of the researcher. It seems more plausible that geniuses perceive new concepts as the radio receiver takes a radiogram and deciphers it. If the researcher is ready for such a transcript, the discovery is deemed to be held. In order for the radio receiver to receive a message transmitted over the air, it must be be tuned to the same wavelength as the transmitter. If you try to catch 98.1 classical music channel, tuning the receiver to 106.9, you will hear either soft jazz or incomprehensible cacophony that does not make sense. If the human brain would have perceived global mind information with the ease of the radio receiver, it would be sufficient to concentrate a little and immediately catch it. But this happens quite rarely. In the vast majority of cases, finding a new solution requires a long, very long effort. When an inspiration comes, it seems incomprehensible why it did not show up before. Nothing has changed. New knowledge has not been added. New methods have not appeared. The idea presents itself. Just a minute ago, there was no trace of it, and suddenly it strikes the scientist like a lightning bolt. Science does not explain such a logical behavior of capricious innovation. Here, as in other cases, it would be prudent to resort to the opinion of an authoritative person. Remember that Newton and Buffon asserted, "Genius is patience." They knew what they were talking about. The patience of a thought centered on one issue plays the same role in the brain as tuning the receiver to the desired wave. This phenomenon is inexplicable from the point of view of traditional science. With our hypothesis, it follows logically. Remember, we concluded that global mind communicates with living beings with coded impulse signals. These signals are very weak and constantly distorted by extraneous noise. How does our communication occur in conditions of weak signals and strong interference? We shout into the phone, "I cannot hear you. You disappeared somewhere. Repeat slowly. Now spell it." As a result, the transfer of short information, like "the rain in Spain falls mainly on the plain," takes a long time. You need to make sure there is rain in plain, not a brain drain. It falls in Spain and not in Bahrain. And only after that you understand, take the right actions, and buy an umbrella. All ingenious people differ from the ordinary by the irresistible need for constant and intense concentration. For them, this becomes a necessary condition for existence, sometimes pernicious. Sometimes this is health detrimental. If the brain concentration reaches the limit and the person does not have time to rest, the brain becomes tired, fatigued, and the body begins to give up. Here is what Russian writer Mikhail Shevchenko writes in the novel The Youth Returned about the brilliant poet Vladimir Mayakovsky. The extreme weariness of the brain and the inability to create a proper rest to itself led Mayakovsky to an early death. Here was the tragedy of permanent work. Even walking along the streets, Mayakovsky muttered verses. Even playing cards to interrupt the inertia of the work, Mayakovsky, as he told the author, continued to think out, and nothing, no travel, no hobbies, no sleep, nothing turned his head completely off. This created chronic nervous irritation. Every year, the poet felt worse. Headaches, lethargy, and frustration intensified. The weary and weakened brain does not carry very much for the domestic body economy. This led the poet to death. One of the reasons why such a concentration is needed is that global mind may communicate with us by scanning all the people's brains one by one. First, it spends a certain time taking care of Mr. A. In a couple of minutes, turns its attention to Mr. B, and so forth. After reaching the last person in a queue, global mind returns to Mr. A again. Let us say Mr. D's is scheduled to be scanned by global minds from 11:45 a.m. to 11:50 a.m. and later from 3:05 p.m. to 3:10 p.m. If Mr. D, a genius, is concentrating on the problem all the time from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., he will not miss the short periods of direct communication with global mind. He will get its decisive moment at least twice. The problem will be solved. But if Mr. D is not a genius and spends these two time windows flirting with his female coworker, the inspiration will fly by unnoticed. This is a valid presumption explaining a genius modus operandi. There are other methods for a communication with global mind. Here is the list. 1. Meditation. 2. Prayer. 3. Substances. Alcohol, tobacco, drugs. I am not an expert on the third method and consider it to be quite individual. Allegedly, it helps selected individuals to find an inspiration, but for the majority, it brings no creativity. Otherwise, officials would have demanded that the workers call for a duty being high or slightly drunk. Creativity in this state should be considered an exception. An article originally appeared in the Daily Daily Mail, London, on Sunday, August 8, 2004, with the headline, "Crick was high on LSD when he discovered the secret of life." It was a rumor that Francis Crick used the drug for creative thinking, unraveling the structure of DNA, the discovery that won him the Nobel Prize. Directly under Crick is Kary Mullis, who won the Nobel Prize for Chemistry in 1993 for his invention of a method for detecting even the smallest amount of DNA's ancient materials. Would I have invented PCR if I hadn't taken LSD? I seriously doubt it, he says. I could sit on a DNA molecule and watch the polymers go by. I learned that partly on psychedelic drugs. In contrast to the intensive work and reception of psychedelics, meditation and prayer do not bring harm to health. So let us dwell in more detail on these two methods. It should be noted that these methods also need concentration and patience. In addition, proper body preparation is desirable. Often you hear the expression, fasting and prayer. It is clear that the body is not too receptive to sublime thoughts after a hearty meal and is not perfectly suitable for global mind contact. Body preparation is often preceded by fasting, physical and breathing exercises, asanas and pranayama. But what is a meditation? First of all, it is a deep inner concentration. The second condition for successful meditation is a considerable time and constant practice. It exists not only in the Eastern teachings, but occupies a significant place in Islam and Christianity, where it is known as hesychasm. St. John of Sinai writes, "Hesychasm is the enclosing of the bodiless primary cognitive faculty of the soul." Is this not the direct instruction of an enlightened person to communicate with global mind? Eastern contemplators developed a whole series of special techniques. The highest stages of such contemplation are samadhi and nirvana. Samadhi may be defined as a non-dualistic state in which the consciousness of the experiencing subject becomes one with the experienced object. Samadhi is a state in which the idea of one's individuality disappears and the unity of the perceiving and perceived, the fusion of individual as a microcosm with the cosmic absolute or the macrocosm, arises. Such description looks rather vague for an uninitiated person, and the writings of the Oriental enlighteners do not add a clear understanding to the question of what the macrocosm is. In the light of our hypothesis, this issue becomes completely transparent. When a person who has prepared his body, freed himself from the desires, and learns to concentrate his thought without any hindrances, he gets direct access to the global mind mental treasury. Moreover, as Eastern philosophers teach that advanced person can tune up his inner program, a soul, in such a way that it does not reincarnate after physical death, but remains in a virtual world, breaking the inevitable chain of births and deaths for good. A person who does not strive for such a high goal can benefit from meditation as well. He can improve his mood, lower blood pressure, and even increase mental abilities. An important condition for successful meditation is a constant concentration on just a few key words. In the East, this is called mantra. In the West, affirmation. Religious people chant sacred words. Those who want to achieve common goals, for example, to improve a memory, must also learn to repeat short code phrases. Once, being a very young man, I had been learning English. Still continuing. I had a special notebook in which I recorded Russian words on the left and their translation into English on the right. After a while, I noticed that I can learn about 30 words a day. Learn meant that I still remember them in a month. Then I added to my classes 2 15-minute yoga workouts. In the so-called corpse pose, Shavasana, complete relaxation of the musculature was achieved. In this state, 2 or 3 phrases were mentally pronounced. I have an excellent memory. I remember words easily and for a long time. I just look at the page and all the words are imprinted forever. During each daily session, these phrases were pronounced hundreds of times, like a spell. And what do you think? In 2 weeks, I managed to learn up to 100 words per day. Of course, the technique of meditation and the formulation of an affirmative formula are strictly individual. The general rule is the brevity of the formula and its mental pronunciation repeatedly. Our body has become accustomed to the fact that the information transmitted to it by global mind is encoded by repetition. Therefore, autosuggestion is successful when using this technique. Why is short and repeated affirmation necessary for a successful meditation? Would it be logical to speak eloquently and verbose to global mind about all your needs and desires? Would it be necessary to describe your thoughts and necessities from various points of view? To emphasize all the nuances of your spiritual requests? To share with global mind the inmost intricacies of the experiences of your multifaceted personality? Such procedure is much less successful than a simple phrase containing several keywords. Why? Again, Global Mind communicates with us exactly the same way. To accurately transfer your will, it is necessary to transmit the same information repeatedly, enclosed in a simple form. Only this way the information will reach the addressee in its original undistorted form. This is a protection against information distortion. Meditation is such a powerful and simple tool for your being's improvement that I would strongly recommend that the listener gets acquainted with existing practices, choose the right one for himself, and introduce it into everyday life. You will not regret it. Now, let us turn to prayer as a way of communicating with the Lord Most High for believers. A beadsman is actually talking to the higher power directly. The worshippers turn to God, to the saints, to the guardian angels. And we know that prayer is an effective means of appeasement, finding the right path, and often a healing, mental and physical. From the point of view of the believer, the God, if he loves us, must listen to the desires of the supplicant and satisfy them. We are well aware that not all the prayers are fulfilled. Why is that? Religious dogmatists have one answer: how unsearchable his judgments and his paths beyond tracing out. But Global Mind's ways are absolutely logical if you accept our hypothesis. Let us make a small, humorous digression, quoting Mark Twain. Office of the Recording Angel, Department of Petitions, January 20th. Andrew Langdon, coal dealer, Buffalo, New York. I have the honor, as per command, to inform that your recent act of benevolence and self-sacrifice has been recorded upon a page by itself of the book called Golden Deeds of Men. A distinction, I am permitted to remark, which is not merely extraordinary, it is unique. As regards your prayers, for the week ending the 19th, I have the honor to report as follows. 1. For weather to advance hard coal 15 cents per ton. Granted. 2. For influx of laborers to reduce wages 10%. Granted. 3. For a break in rival soft coal prices. Granted. 4. For a visitation upon the man, or upon the family of the man, who has set up a competing retail coal yard in Rochester. Granted as follows. Diphtheria, 2. 1 fatal. Scarlet fever, 1. To result in deafness and imbecility. Note, this prayer should have been directed against this subordinate's principals, the New York Central Railroad Corporation. 5. For deportation to Shoal of annoying swarms of persons who applied daily for work, or for favors of one sort or another, taken under advisement for later decision and compromise. This petition appearing to conflict with another one of same date, which will be cited further along. 6. For application of some form of violent death to neighbor who threw brick at family cat, whilst the same was serenading. Reserved for consideration and compromise because of conflict with a prayer of even date to be cited further along. 7. To damn the missionary cause. Reserved also, as above. 8. To increase December profits of $22,230 to $45,000 for January, and perpetuate a proportionate monthly increase thereafter, which will satisfy you. The prayer granted, the added remark accepted with reservations. 9. For cyclone to destroy the works and fill up the mine of the North Pennsylvania Company. Note, cyclones are not kept in stock in the winter season. A reliable article of fire dump can be furnished upon application. A special note is made of the above list, they being of a particular moment. The 298 remaining supplications classifiable under the head of Special Providences, Schedule A, for week ending 19th, are granted in a body, except that 3 of the 32 cases requiring immediate death have been modified to incurable disease. This completes the week's invoice of petitions known to this office under the technical designation of secret supplications of the heart, and which, for a reason which may suggest itself, always receive our first and especial attention. The remainder of the week's invoice falls under the head of what we term public prayers, in which classification we place prayers uttered in prayer meeting, Sunday school class meeting, family worship, etc. These kind of prayers have value according to classification of Christian uttering them. To resume report upon your public prayers, with the side remark that in order to encourage Christians of your grade and of approximate grades, it is the custom of this office to grant many things to them which would not be granted to Christians of a higher grade, partly because they would not be asked for. Prayer for weather mercifully tempered to the needs of the poor and the naked. Denied. This was a prayer meeting prayer. It conflicts with item 1 of this report, which was a secret supplication of the heart. By a rigid rule of this office, certain sorts of public prayers of professional Christians are forbidden to take precedence of secret supplications of the heart. Prayer for better times and plentiful food, for the hard-handed son of toil whose patient and exhaustive exhausting labors make comfortable the homes and pleasant the ways of the more fortunate, and entitle him to our vigilant and effective protection from the wrongs and injustices which grasping avarice would do him, and to the tenderest offices of our grateful hearts. Prayer meeting prayer. Refused. Conflicts with secret supplication of the heart. Number 2. Prayer that such as in any way obstruct our preferences may be generally blessed, both themselves and their families. We here calling our hearts to witness that in their worldly prosperity we are spiritually blessed and our joys made perfect. Your remaining 401 details count for wind only. We bunch them and use them for headwinds and retarding the ships of improper people, but it takes so many of them to make an impression that we cannot allow anything for their use. Signed, the recording angel. Seal. Understanding the prayer meaning and its fulfillment likelihood will be greatly simplified if we look at it from the global mind point of view. I say repeatedly that my weak mental abilities do not allow to recreate the complexity of global mind's intellectual process and motives. But if we assume that we are created in global mind's likeness, such an attempt has a chance. So, imagine for a moment that you think like the global mind, and as such are responsible for all the diversity of the earth life. What would be your main and perhaps the only objective? It is not the maintenance of your own existence and well-being. After all, you do not have much of physical or psychological limitations. You do not need to eat or to be afraid. You have one condition, however. You cannot violate the recursive law of information growth. This natural law is mightier than you. The amount of information increases rapidly. It must be stored somewhere. The information is immaterial, but it is placed on completely material objects, the cells of living beings, and, first of all, in the most developed and convenient gray cells, the brains. Therefore, your first objection is to maintain the necessary amount of this very gray matter in a healthy, active state. Further reasoning would be very simple. If the believer's prayer coincides with the global mind's objection, it will be received with attention. If a believer, because of selfishness or stupidity, asks for something that is contradictory to this goal fulfillment, the prayer will be rejected. Imagine that there is some deviant person causing negative emotions in the majority of the people around him. This person may be your personal enemy. He specifically did something nasty to you. For example, he kicked your favorite cat or loudly turns on music after midnight. Yes, this person brings only trouble to society, and, in your uneducated opinion, no one would be hurt if he suddenly evaporates into thin air, or conversely, falls through the ground. But for global mind, the brain of this person is equivalent to any other brain. You are an integral global mind component as well. It turns out that for both global mind and you, this person is as valuable as your most beloved relative. He is a global information holder and carrier. Your well-being depends on people like him after the death of your physical body. If you die before him, your individual bulk of information, the soul, will be placed in other brains, including the brain of this deviant person. He is you. This inconvenient person has very few well-wishers, and no one wants to pray for him. For good people, we would pray constantly. This leads us to a completely logical conclusion. But I say to you, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you. Matthew 5:44. The global mind objective is permanent, irreversible increase of global biosphere intelligence. In order to do this, global mind must support the bearers of this intelligence in good health and sufficient quantity. If one of the members of our society falls out of the general clip and begins to fail to function in incomplete force, this will lead to the whole organism malfunctioning. Is it still difficult to agree with this notion? The idea would become clearer if we turn it into something closer to you. Imagine that you have a perfectly healthy body. Your brain works brilliantly, the stomach digests food with no problem, the heart beats perfectly, and the vessels are elastic. Life is beautiful, and you forget that the organism exists at all. As some healthy people say, I do not know which side my heart is. And here, on this happy and bright background, you got a whitlow on your little finger. Yes, it hurts, but worse, your precious body may get an infection and even die out of it. Will not you, from now on, pay more attention to the smallest finger than to the rest of your body? Of course you will, since this small member constantly torments you, does not allow you to sleep at night. Therefore, you forget the activities related to the health of the rest of the organs and begin to take care of only a small and insignificant object. This seems logical to you for the reason that you feel this problem. Global mind, unlike us stupid and limited individuals, sees the entire entire biosphere as a whole and encourage us to accept the same vision. But why, the reader asks, meditation and prayer are described in the section, How to Communicate Correctly with the Universal Mind? Isn't that just autosuggestion? It can happen inside the body. Yes, autosuggestion also works, but if you communicate with global mind, the result will be much more pronounced. Therefore, both meditation and prayer are best obtained by immersion in a state that can be described as drowsy, on the verge of sleeping and waking, as a trance. In it, you surrender yourself to the global mind's will, as in a sleep. This state can be and should be studied and practiced constantly. Our hypothesis makes some of not so clear Jesus' commandments quite simple and logical. There is no doubt that Jesus himself understood their deep meaning and knew that many orders of magnitude better than the author of these lines. Why did not he open the meanings to other people, or at least to his disciples? This is also very clear. You, the listener, have heard these lines. Did I manage to convince you of the truth of the hypothesis here? I doubt it very much. The worm of doubt is eating you, even if you have listened to the book to this point. But you are much more educated than Jesus' disciples and the crowds of admirers who followed him. Therefore, Jesus expounded his teaching to the contemporaries in parables, dropping only one bitter line. I have much more to say to you, more than you can now bear. John 16:12.